You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Friday the 11th of July 2014. UK Supreme Court Justice says Christians should marry Muslims as a way of tackling Islamophobia. Politicians making it up as they go along, says head of RAF as he attacks indecision. Belgium needs a Homeland Security Department. Spanish police conducting 368 investigations into Islamist terrorism. Islamist plot to blow up Eiffel Tower, Louvre and nuclear power plant foiled, say French police. Soldiers raid Nigeria's Aba Central Mosque, arrest imam and others for making bombs. IDF official, Hamas embedding itself in schools and hospitals. Thought for the day, how do I put this without offending? And finally, 2 for 1 day Friday. There won't be any Nick Griffin today, my friends, as he's taking advantage of the last of his travelling Europe for the nationalist cause. However, there are more chats and reports in the offing. I'm sure we wish him well on his journeys, and you can catch up with Nick on Twitter. UK News. UK Supreme Court Justice says Christians should marry Muslims as a way of tackling Islamophobia. Lord Scott, a former Supreme Court judge, cited his own family, in which 2 of his 4 children married Muslims, as an example of how interfaith families can thrive. The peer, who sits as a crossbencher in the Lords, made the comments during a debate on how to improve relations between the Muslim community and other faith groups in the UK. He said, "Of my 2 sons, one has become a Muslim, and of my 2 daughters, one of those has become a Muslim, and I have 12 lovely grandchildren, 7 of whom are little Muslims." He added the family relationships since those events took place have been as happily familial, as close and as good as any parent or grandparent could wish. I do just wonder that if an improvement is needed between faith groups, one way of promoting that might be to encourage interfaith marriages. Responding for the government, Baroness Vorsey said it's important that we allow people to marry somebody of their choosing, whatever faith they belong to, and that's why I'm incredibly proud that the government has done so much work on the issue of forced marriages, including criminalising a practice which should have been criminalised a long time ago. World at 8. Well, if you can't get them one way, get them another. Lord Scott may be okay with this state of affairs, but I know of quite a few intermarriages between Christians and Muslims that have not worked out so well. Perhaps it helps to marry rich, but then money covers all, doesn't it? Politicians making it up as they go along, says head of RAF as he attacks indecision. The head of the Royal Air Force has delivered a stark critique of politicians for lacking decisiveness and making it up as they go along. Air Chief Marshal Sir Andrew Pulford said military figures wanted answers now, but had to deal with civilian leaders who had left everything until the last moment and were obsessed with cost. The comments, which could irritate David Cameron and Defence Secretary Philip Hammond, among others, came in a speech to a conference organised by think tank the Royal United Services Institute. Sir Andrew, Chief of the Air Staff, told the event in London that the RAF's core function was to look after the airspace of British territory. That simple answer to what we are for is why so many governments take the easy way with the air forces, he said. Look at how many air forces in the world simply do that. They do the non-discretionary. It's that further ambition that really puzzles us. That balance between what politicians might want me to do and how much they want me to pay for it, and how much time and effort and resource they wish me to invest in it. That has always been the way, that balance between politics and the military. Sir Andrew went on, "I am a military man, I want an answer now. The politician, if I could leave it a couple of days, could you wait till the end of next week? I really don't feel like making a decision just yet. I'll leave it right till the last moment. Do I have to make a decision now? I want that decision now. I want to know exactly what you want me to do, and I want the end state. The politician, he's not really sure what the end state is. He doesn't really care. He's got to be seen to be doing something. We need to be there. I'll make that up as we go along." That doesn't sit comfortably. I want to take enough people and enough equipment to get the job done to meet that end state, and I want that decision now. Well, if you can go, you can go with fewer people because politically I want to be seen maintaining a sort of a level on this. And of course the big cruncher, how much is all this going to cost? I don't care about the cost. I need the resource, the people to get the job done, get the end state in the timeline. We are trying to balance that political ambition with my need to explain to the politicians, if you give me X, I can do Y. World at 8. Well, it sounds as if Sir Andrew Pulford has set his retirement date and now feels free to speak the truth about his bosses. European news. Belgium needs a Homeland Security Department. Bart de Wever, Mayor of Antwerp and the leader of the Flemish Nationalist Party N-VA, has said that Belgium needs a Homeland Security Department. The leader of Belgium's largest political party was speaking following a meeting of Flemish and Dutch mayors in Delft. The mayors had an opportunity to share experiences with regard to nationals leaving and returning from the civil war in Syria. The Dutch anti-terrorism coordinator also attended the meeting. Mayor of Mechelen, Bart Somers: we can learn much from each other. Many Dutch mayors are confronted with youngsters who go and fight in Syria and then return. How can you prevent this and stop youngsters from doing something stupid? How can you ensure they do not pose a threat to security when they return? How do we deal with them when they return and monitor their activities? World at 8. You grow some balls and stop them coming back and deport their families from the free-for-all that is Europe. Think what they would do under the same circumstances. Spanish police conducting 368 investigations into Islamist terrorism. Right now there are 837 terrorism investigations underway in Spain, of which 368 involve Islamist groups, according to counter-terrorism sources. The Interior Ministry considers that the risk of new Islamist attack in Spain is high, and the government has activated a level 2 alert because of the probable risk of an attack. On March 11, 2004, Islamists blew up several commuter trains in Madrid, killing 192 people and injuring 1,858. Before that, in April 1985, another Islamist bomb attack killed 18 people at a Madrid restaurant. World at 8. The one in 2004 led to a change of direction in an election, so the Islamists proved a point. You can get anything if you bomb a European country, but you cannot be held accountable. Islamist plot to blow up Eiffel Tower, Louvre and nuclear power plant foiled, say French police. An Islamist plot to blow up the Eiffel Tower, the Louvre and a nuclear power plant has been foiled, according to French police. Officers stumbled on the plans, made up of a series of coded messages, between a 29-year-old Algerian butcher living in the south of France known as Aliem and a high-ranking member of Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. The members of Al-Qaeda was known online as Roudain 18. Le Parisien newspaper reported that in April last year, the married father of two was contacted by his Al-Qaeda contact. Ali M suggested targeting nuclear power plants, planes at the moment of takeoff and French landmarks, which included the Eiffel Tower and the Louvre Museum in Paris. He even suggested targeting people in market or nightclubs as well as cultural events which attract thousands of Christians. World at 8. Oh blast, there goes my plan to blow up Mecca. On a serious note, it is the nuclear reactor that worried me. These people have no conscience and very little brains. They be dead, so they don't really care who else dies. World news. Soldiers raid Nigeria's Aba Central Mosque, arrest Imam and others for making bombs. Soldiers in Aba on Sunday carried out an early morning raid at Aba Central Mosque and the residences of some of the town's Muslims. They arrested the chief imam of the mosque, Idris Bashir, his deputy, Mohammed Hassan, and 11 others over suspicion of stockpiling guns and planning to manufacture bombs. The chief imam informed Premium Times over the telephone that the soldiers came to their area at about 2 a.m, where they arrested 4 persons at the mosque while he and the others were picked from their houses. He said the soldiers in their raid saw some bottles of chemicals at the science laboratory of the school and accused the school officials of using them to manufacture bombs. The chief imam said the major concern now was the fate of two of their colleagues who had been moved from Asa, where they were initially kept, to Ohafia. Soldiers had last month arrested 486 northerners travelling through Abia State to Port Harcourt, Rivers State. Many of them were eventually released after being detained for weeks, while the military said it was still investigating others. The House of Representatives had on Tuesday rejected a motion that sought to investigate and put a stop to the series of arrests of northerners by soldiers in Abia State. World at 8. Oh, poor things, detained for weeks, my heart bleeds. What sort of action do you expect from a hellhole like Nigeria, which is becoming mainly Muslim? Probably paid off the soldiers with the schoolgirls. IDF official: Hamas embedding itself in schools and hospitals. A senior IDF official has told Arutz Shevia that the army has no choice but to launch a ground offensive into Gaza in order to stamp out rocket fire on Israeli civilians, because Hamas and other terrorist groups have embedded their military infrastructure so deeply into the civilian population that it is impossible to reach via air power without causing massive collateral damage. In particular, the source said Hamas had hidden its missile stockpiles and even embedded launch pads specifically in schools and hospitals, callously using the most vulnerable members of society as human shields. At the same time, the Islamist group is not allowing civilians to leave the area. On the contrary, it is encouraging as many non-combatants as possible to protect its positions with their bodies. As a result, he said, a ground invasion is all but inevitable. Earlier Thursday it was revealed that Hamas told Gazans not to listen to IDF warnings of impending strikes, but to stay indoors and act as human shields. The Israeli Air Force has used numerous methods, from phone calls and leaflets to firing Dud missiles before a strike, known as knocking on the roof, to warn non-combatants prior to military strikes in their vicinity. But Hamas-run Gaza Interior Ministry said in a message to residents that the warnings are designed to weaken our resolve and sow panic and fear among us, in light of the failures of our enemies. We call on Gaza residents not to pay attention to these messages and not to leave their homes. World at 8. I believe the Israelis here. Hamas has for years fought from the base of the civilian populations, thus the pickies that come through are kids etc. used as human shields. Thought for the day: how do I put this? How do I put this without offending someone? Well, I don't, so probably will. You can't please all the world all the time, so here I go on a Friday wail. In the media this week was a fact that our British employers are hiring foreign labour because not only are they cheaper, but the English equivalent is almost illiterate. Now there is a surprise, and the CK plan is even more well implemented than I thought on an endemic level, that of work and employment. Of course, give me the first 5 years of a child and I give you the man has been adopted, adapted and improved on a national curriculum level the likes of which the Western world has not seen ever. In the golden days of old there was a choice of schools for most people of most incomes, and indeed the old village schools and inner city council schools were better run and better attended than nowadays by people who did not have 2 cars and holidays, but poor souls who had barely enough to eat and wanted their children to do better than them. It wasn't a perfect world, where bad things happened to good people and good things happened to bad people, but it was better than the nanny state we have now, where sexual abuse is considered the worst thing possible when it was committed 40 years ago by famous white guys, yet the continual sexual abuse by foreigners still being perpetrated throughout this country today on our young girls has been swept under the diversity carpet. And the government spend millions of pounds in investigating Hillsborough, which was a perfect storm of unruly people, bad policing and just too many bodies in one place at one time. Nasty things happen. They cannot all be accounted for or explained or even justified. They are acts of God. It doesn't make them acceptable, but one has to accept the finality of certain happenings. And as the old saying goes, stop raking over cold coals. There is so much more we should as a people be worried about, and this employing foreigners because ours are no good is something that has slid under the radar. It has been investigated and of course we have been found wanting. That is, several generations of our own young have been, and we take this without a murmur. or a whinge. The education in this country used to be the best in the world, rather like our shoemakers. People from other countries used to buy our shoes, as indeed we did. Nowadays we buy from China, a people not known for their perfect leather, metal lasts or even good shoes or boots, but more for the bound foot look of small round feet and no left and no right. So you see, our standards have flopped even over shoes. So God help our educational standards. But one must admit we do provide a free and reasonable education for the millions of migrants in this country. They could do no better than us for providing their children with a well-rounded education and a sense of their cultures and history, whilst of course ignoring the British or English culture because it would upset them. It is this reason why British education is not up to scratch anymore for us and our progeny. At least not in the state sector, which of course is heavily diversified and indoctrinated in upholding foreigners' children's sensibilities whilst totally ignoring English kids, who frankly do not stand a chance in between the black culture and the Islamic culture. Which to choose? Oh joy! By the time little Damien from a single parent family on an estate goes to school, he'll be well diversified from the TV and Xbox games to believe that this is not a white Christian country anymore, and that in fact he is to blame for everything that has gone wrong with the world and England in particular, and that he has no hope of ever getting a job because he will, like many of his ethnic pals, live off the state or do drugs or booze or something that brings in quick money. Whilst attitudes will clash, certain parents who think that while they go on holidays, have homes kitted out with home-based stuff and drive several cars, the state should provide them with a free education for their offspring. So God help the teacher who tries to install in little Damien the right to work both at school and beyond. He or she will be met by a raging parent who thinks that dim Damien is being educated beyond his means. Whilst this is going on, the Chinese, Indian and Muslim kids are being told to work their backsides off so that they will be able to send their kids to our private or public schools in the future. They will also take the top professional jobs because this is the only country in the world that promotes ethnic youngsters over its own. And now this is showing in the stats of employers and illiteracy on a large anti-white scale. Of course, if we hadn't had massive immigration into Britain for the last 40 odd years, this particular problem would just apply to the British and West Indian descendants. That would comprise not entirely, of course, of the Sink Estate and beyond reach white retards and a vast majority of the displaced West Indian kids who bring their culture and drugs to the fore in place of being taught. Gangsterland in short. No, I'm not saying that all West Indian descendants drop down to this level. Many make the professional classes, but you have to admit many more of them are helped more than our own white youth. There are quite a few black charitable organisations just for blacks, because apparently the British haven't been helping them out for hundreds of years before. Well, we used to put kids up chimneys, work them to death in mills and factories and workhouses, and those that weren't hanged for stealing loaves of bread were shipped off these shores to Australia and Americas. So no one can say we've treated our own poor youth well at all. It is with this record that we have apparently taken on the mission of educating the rest of the sodding world in our schools and universities, to the detriment once again of our own children. And it is a crime against humanity that our own greedy employers, well versed in diversity, are allowed to get away with this statement without a public outcry. But they will. Poor old Michael Gove is struggling against the EU and the plan to bring back a choice in schools, but he'll only succeed in giving foreign children, whether born in this country or not, a better educational choice for their parents. Our white poor will still be left out, only this time not because of lack of money or position, but lack of sheer numbers of them. All our state schools are heavily attended by a vast majority of ethnic children, and this number will increase day by day, month by month, and year by year. Gone are the days when parents sacrifice to send their kids to private or public schools. All expect the state to carry the burden of future generations' literacy and knowledge. One of the many ills that immigration has brought to this country are the rules of diversity. Look after foreigners first and your own second. You cannot make a child learn, but you can provide it with a class full of its peers in culture and religion, good impartial teachers and the will to learn. In the bad old days, if a youngster wanted to get on and learn, even a bad state school couldn't stop him. There were standards that everyone adhered to, without the pressure of diversity and the alternate alien cultures within his classroom. Kids go to the highest bidder, especially without guidance, and how can you teach a class the English language or writing when 90% of that class are foreign and cannot speak English and only speak their own language in their homes? You tell me. This means without proper supervised homework from an early age, by the time these kids are teenagers, many will not be able to write a letter, spell correctly, or even carry on a conversation in English as it is spoke. They will be without any standards of behaviour because that isn't on the web, a mobile or a tablet, or indeed the celeb culture, which has replaced ambition and hard work. In short, without some sort of shifting in this country back to standards and innovation, our grandchildren might as well be sitting outside a mud hut, smoking the ganja or worse, pimping out their sisters or running a taxi rank. In short, we are turning our own into ethnics and turning ethnics into our own. And this is not a good way for the future, although it may be all in the plan for the UK. Most parents are too lazy, too self-absorbed or too frightened to make a point, because they have to give little Damien or Esmeralda their space to be their own person. Now, no good ever came of allowing a kid to be their own person, because a person takes years to form and ambitions and hopes are something to achieve. However, we are not strangers to this, and we are allowing millions of foreign children, whether from Europe, Africa, Asia or Arabia, to take over our children's inheritance, both educationally and financially. So what would you rather happen? Nothing or something? Can you make a difference? Can you turn back the clock? For the sake of future generations, I sincerely hope so. And finally, 2 for 1 Day Friday. A Russian arrives in London as a new immigrant to the United Kingdom. He stops the first person he sees walking down the street and says, "Thank you, Mr. Englishman, for letting me into this country, giving me housing, free medical care and free education." The passerby says, "You're mistaken, I'm a Pakistani." The man goes on and encounters another passerby. "Thank you for having such a beautiful country here in England." The person says, "You're mistaken, and I'm Indian." The new arrival walks further and the next person he sees, he stops, shakes his hands and says, "Thank you for the wonderful United Kingdom." The person puts up his hand and says, "I'm from the Philippines, I'm not English." He finally sees a nice lady and asks, Are you English?" She says, "No, I'm from Africa." Puzzled, he asks her, "Where are all the English?" The African lady checks her watch and says, "Probably at work." And not to be outdone, ladies, 3 blonde men are stranded on an island. Suddenly a fairy appears and offers to grant each one of them a wish. The first blonde asks to be intelligent. Instantly he is turned into a brown-haired man and swims off the island. The next one asks to be even more intelligent than the previous one, so he's turned into a black-haired man. The black-haired man builds a boat and sails off the island. The third blonde asks to become even more intelligent than the previous 2. The fairy turns him into a woman and she walks across the bridge. You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozart, and I and the team at World at 8 and Radio Britain wish you all a very happy and a very safe weekend. Islamophobia. Politicians making it up as they go along, says head of RAF as he attacks indecision. Belgium needs a Homeland Security Department. Spanish police conducting 368 investigations into Islamist terrorism. Islamist plot to blow up Eiffel Tower, Louvre and nuclear power plant foiled, say French police. Soldiers raid Nigeria's Abba Central Mosque, arrest Imam and others for making bombs. IDF official, Hamas embedding itself in schools and hospitals. Thought for the day, how do I put this without offending? And finally, 2 for 1 Day Friday. There won't be any Nick Griffin today, my friends, as he's taking advantage of the last of his travelling Europe for the nationalist cause. However, there are more chats and reports in the offing. I'm sure we wish him well on his journeys and you can catch up with Nick on Twitter. UK News. UK Supreme Court Justice says Christians should marry Muslims as a way of tackling Islamophobia. Lord Scott, a former Supreme Court judge, cited his own family, in which 2 of his 4 children married Muslims, as an example of how interfaith families can thrive. The peer, who sits as a crossbencher in the Lords, made the comments during a debate on how to improve relations between the Muslim community and other faith groups in the UK. He said, "Of my 2 sons, one has become a Muslim, and of my 2 daughters, one of those has become a Muslim, and I have 12 lovely grandchildren, 7 of whom are little Muslims." He added the family relationships since those events took place
You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number 1 in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Friday the 11th of July 2014. UK Supreme Court Justice says Christians should marry Muslims as a way of tackling have been as happily familial, as close and as good as any parent or grandparent could wish. I do just wonder that if an improvement is needed between faith groups, one way of promoting that might be to encourage interfaith marriages. Responding for the government, Baroness Vorsey said it's important that we allow people to marry somebody of their choosing, whatever faith they belong to, and that's why I'm incredibly proud that the government has done so much work on the issue of forced marriages, including criminalising a practice which should have been criminalised a long time ago. World at 8. Well, if you can't